Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel, I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable. Let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. The post at the edge of my headlights had a number on it that belonged 14 miles further down that road. 19 years hauling, no chargeable accident, no citation, and I have never once gone to anybody about anything. My name's Faye Tolman. I was 44 that summer. I lived in Grantsville, and I hauled bulk fuel to the proving ground and back twice a week on the night side, out of a jobber's yard on the west side of the valley. The night side paid a little more, and I liked it better, and I want the work record said first because it is the load-bearing part of everything after it. You should understand what kind of road that is. It comes off the interstate and runs south, and there's nothing on it. Nothing I ever found, anyway, and I looked for 19 years. I don't mean nothing much, I mean nothing. 40 miles of 2 lanes with no shoulder to speak of, a white line only on the outside, and then a turn west toward the gate. Sagebrush on both sides, and the salt going out flat past that, and mountains on the west that have a hard black top edge to them when the moon is up. In the daylight, you can see 40 miles or so, and it does not look like anything is there, because nothing is. At night, you can see about 400 feet, and it is the same. The road was patched. Long tar seams laid crossways, and at 41 miles an hour they come under a loaded truck at a rate you could set a watch to. Thump, thump, thump. I probably knew the patched miles from the old miles with my eyes shut, and I say that to give you an idea of how much of that road was in me. 8,200 gallons behind you, and you drive different. You take the grade at 41. You take the corners like a woman carrying soup. I ran with the window down instead of the fan. That was not for the air. When you're loaded, you get a little of the product through the vents on a hot night. Not much, not enough to bother a person, but enough that after 19 years, the smell of it means work to you. The way a school smells like a school. With the window down, you get it going past instead of sitting in it. Also, you hear the road. A truck tells you things through the window that it will not tell you through glass, and I would rather be hot and know. That night was July. 2:10 in the morning, 78 degrees, window down, moon 3 nights off, full. I remember the temperature because the jobber had a thermometer nailed by the pump house, and I read it before I pulled out of habit, the way you read a clock you already know the time from. Here is the part I always have to explain, and I know how small it sounds. There's a cattle guard about a mile south of the junction. Double thump, reflectors on the wings, sagebrush growing up through the pipes. Every trip for 19 years, I zeroed the trip meter on that cattle guard. The reset knob on that truck was stiff, and you had to lean and turn it with a thumbnail, and it left a mark on the nail. And then I called the mile numbers out loud as I went by them. They stamped them on the low delineator posts on the right-hand side, and I said them out loud in a flat voice as they came, the way a woman counts stitches. 51, 52, 53. A driver named Cal gave me that when I started. He said a number is company, and it is. It sounds like nothing, but there's a difference between an hour of dark and an hour of dark with a number in it every minute. You are not sitting there. You are doing something. Cal had been on that road since before it was paved the whole way. He was maybe 60 when I met him. I never asked. And he had a way of teaching you things without saying he was teaching you. He'd tell you a thing once, in a doorway, with his coat half on, and then never mention it again. And you would find out 2 years later that you had been doing it every night since. That was one of his. The other one was about not looking at the mirrors on a straight, which I have never been able to obey. He died in the 80s, at home. I think it was 84, and I did not find out for 4 months, which I have never quite got over. But I still say his numbers. I said them the night I am telling you about, and I said them last week. That is the whole system. A knob, a thumbnail, and me saying numbers to myself in a cab. There was one other night driver on that run that summer, a man named Gorange, and he was on days that month, so there was nobody else out there. I want to say something about Gorange because it belongs in this. He ran that road at night for 11 years, off and on, and he was not a talker, and in all that time I never once asked him whether he had ever seen anything out there. I had 100 chances. We stood at the same pump on the same mornings. And I never asked him, and he never brought it up, and I have thought about that a great deal more than I have thought about the post. The CB was out of range of the interstate about 10 miles down, and out of range of everything else the whole way. The gate frequency at the post didn't open till 5. Nobody was expecting me anywhere. That is what a night run on that road is. There is nobody to be late for. I'd say I was around mile 40 when the bug stopped. 40 or a little past it. I would not swear to the mile. It was July. On a July night on that road, the glass fills up. By the junction, you have already used the washer once, and you will use it again. And I noticed it because my hand was already on the washer stock when I understood that there was nothing on the windshield to wash. It was clean. Not clean like I'd just done it. Clean like April. I ran the washer anyway. I sat there and watched clean water go across clean glass, and I put the wipers off. And I remember thinking, well, that is a piece of luck. That was probably the last ordinary thought I had for 20 minutes or so. Then there was a light. Low and ahead and off to the left, out past the road and small. I want to be honest about how uninteresting that was. There are lights out there. There is a ranch light 26 miles up the valley, thereabouts. There are pumping stations. There are trucks on the far highway that come and go behind the ridges like somebody flicking a switch. A light is not a thing. I have been driving into and past and around lights on that ground since I was 25. The trouble with that one was that it stayed the same size. I have a way of checking that, which I did not invent, which every night driver has. You put a thing in the top corner of the windshield frame and you keep it there, and you watch it against the frame. You do it with oncoming trucks so you know when to dip. And I put that light in the corner of the frame and held 41, and it did not grow. Not a little. I looked at it, and looked at the road, and looked back at it, and it was in the same place doing the same thing. Later, off the trip meter, I worked out that I ran 4 1/10 miles like that. More or less, call it 4. And then I decided it was a striping crew, and for about a minute and a half I was a perfectly happy woman. That is a real thing. The county stripes at night in July because the heat ruins paint in the day, and I have come up on a night striping crew twice in my life on other roads, and it is exactly that. A light sitting out there not doing much until you're on top of it. So I eased off. I put the flashers on, which you do out of courtesy so the flagger knows you have seen him. I started looking for the vest. I got ready to be a little embarrassed and to wave because I had been staring at a county paint truck for 4 miles. Then my low beams got there. It was not out on the flat at all. It was at the edge of my own road. It was a delineator post, right where the delineator posts are, and the reflector on it came up in my lights the way they all do, that hard silver white. And there was something standing on the far side of it, past where my light stopped. I want to be careful here, because this is where people decide about you. I could not resolve it. That's the truth, and I have never improved on it. And I have tried. And I think a person only gets one go at describing a thing like that honestly. It was taller than the post, I would say. It was the wrong side of the light, so what I had was an edge and then not an edge, and the part of it that was in the light was not a color I could put down and not a surface either. And the part that wasn't in the light was just where the world ended. There was no face. I want that said. There was no face, and there were no arms, and there was no shape I have a word for, and I looked at it for as long as I could stand, and I never got any further than that. I stopped the truck. I set the brake. I got out. I don't know why. People ask me that, and I have nothing. I suppose I wanted to read the number, but I am not sure that is true, and I have stopped trying to make it be true. The engine was running behind me and the air brake had gone off, and I was standing on warm blacktop in July at 2:10 in the morning with my low beams on a post, and I walked up to the post. The number on it was 71. I looked twice. 71. I had said 56 out loud maybe 30 seconds before that. I don't mean I thought I had. I mean I had said it, in a flat voice, the way I say them. I put 2 fingers on the paint. It was cold. I do not think I am wrong about that. Not cool. Cold the way the inside of a pipe is cold. And it was 78 degrees out there, and that post should have been holding the day in it. And past the edge of the light, that thing did not move. It didn't come, and it didn't go, and it didn't do anything at all. And I understood, standing there, that I was being allowed to look. That is the only way I have ever been able to say it. Not watched. Allowed. There's a difference, and I've had 38 years to find a better word, and there isn't one. Then I got back in the cab. And here's the piece of it that gets me, still. I reached for the reset knob. That is what my hand did. 19 years of thumbnail on that knob, and my hand went to it. And I sat there with my thumb on it, and I could not remember whether I had already turned it. And I sat with my thumb on that knob for, I don't know how long, 30 seconds, perhaps longer, and that is where I finally noticed my hands. They were fine. They were doing what I told them. It was just that I could not remember a thing I had done every single trip since 1969. I got the brake off and I got it rolling and I drove on. The next post was 57. 57, then 58, then 59 and up, in order, the whole rest of the way in. And I said every one of them out loud, and my voice was all right. Nothing else happened. I want to be plain about that. I got to the turn, and I got to the gate. The gate had a light on a pole and a mirror on another pole, angled so a man in the booth could see down the side of a truck without leaving his chair, and it was a good mirror, and it was always dirty. You came up, and you stopped where the paint said, and the light took all the color out of everything, and a man came out with a clipboard. He read his clipboard and said the same 4 words he said every time, and I don't remember which 4 they were because they were the same 4, every trip for 19 years. I did not say anything to him. I want to be clear that I had every chance, and I did not say a word, and he had no reason in the world to think anything but that I was tired, which I was. My watch said what the dash clock said. The gate log said what my watch said. I was at that gate at the time. I am always at that gate. Give or take the minute you give or take. Nobody lost anything. Nothing was missing. I unloaded, and I went back, and at 5 or thereabouts I put my sheet on the clip at the plant, and Mr. Rasmussen looked at it and said, "You ran short." He said it the way you'd say it about the weather. Then he initialed it and put it in the clip and asked if I wanted coffee. That is the whole of it on paper. My mileage for that run was 14 miles under what 19 years of my own sheets said it ought to be. And a man in a plant at 5 in the morning said you ran short and offered me coffee, and I said yes, and I drank it standing up. The carbon is in a box in my basement. I know which box. I have not had it out in a while. I have gone back over it every way there is. Post crews do change posts, I suppose. Somebody could have set the wrong one, and the paint could have been fresh from that. And cold is a thing paint can be if you want it badly enough. I could have said 56 out of order. I have been up all night before and read a thing wrong. And a person standing at the side of a road at 2 in the morning is a person, and there are people who walk out there, and God help them. I have poor explanations, and I do not believe any of them, and I don't need to. I never told anybody at the plant. I went home that morning and did what I did every morning that summer. My husband was on days, so the house was mine from 7, and there was a note on the table from him with 2 words on it about the swamp cooler, which had a pad that needed hosing and which he never hosed. I hosed it. I ate something standing at the sink. And then I slept through the middle of a Grantsville afternoon in July with that cooler running in the window, which is a sound I would know anywhere, a sort of wet breathing, and the room going a kind of green from the blind. I slept fine. That's the thing people don't expect. I slept fine that day and every day after. I told him 4 years later in a parking lot, and he was good about it, and we have not talked about it since. I still haul. Not that run, not for years, but I still haul, and I still zero the meter at the cattle guard with my thumbnail, and the mark is still on the nail. And now, at the turn, I write the marker number on the back of my hand in ballpoint, and I wash it off at the plant, and I have never once in 300 trips forgotten to do it, and I have driven that road at night since. 400 times, I'd guess. Probably more, but never once with the radio off. Maybe I read it wrong. That is the likeliest thing, and I am not going to sit here and pretend I am above being tired. But then again, maybe not. 11 times that morning, 6 microphones spread across 4.5 miles of ground heard the same thing at the same hundredth of a second. That is not a figure of speech, and it is not a rounding. 6 channels, 1 vertical line, 11 times. I measured it with a rule. My name's Everett Sobey. I was 27, I had a wife and a small boy and a house on the post, and I ran a sound-ranging bass line on the north end of the proving ground for the range instrumentation shop. 4 years in the Signal Corps before that, which is where I learned to like paper. I should tell you what the work is, because it is the whole story. If something makes a noise out on a range and you want to know where, you do not go and look. You put microphones out in a line, a long way apart, and you record what each one hears on a paper tape, and then you look at which microphone heard it first and by how much. Sound goes about 1,100 feet a second, near enough, so a difference of 1/10 of a second is 110 feet of ground. You get bearings out of the differences. Where the bearings cross, that is your event. 3 microphones will do it, more or less. 6 is better, and we had 6. The tape doesn't have an opinion. That is the thing I liked about it. A man in a doorway at 4 in the morning has all kinds of opinions. The tape has 6 styluses scratching on paper, and it sounds like a mouse in a wall, and it does not care what you think happened. The bass line ran along a bench, 4.5 miles from the first microphone to the 6th on tripods, with the cable lying loose on the ground because it was only out for the season and we taped the joints. At the far end was the recorder trailer. 1 room, a stove, a bench, the 6-channel recorder, a roll of paper 11 inches wide, a bottle of ink, a clipboard, and a 200-watt bulb over the door with the moths going at it all summer. By October, the moths are mostly gone. There were 4 or 5 slow ones that came back every night, or I thought they were the same ones, and I'd started to feel a certain way about them. That morning was the 12th of October, as I remember it. 29 degrees, 4 o'clock or a bit after, and dead calm. Not light air, calm, the kind where your own breath going out is the loudest thing standing outside that door. Now, the check. Every morning at 4:15 they fired a small charge at a surveyed stake at a known distance, so we could prove the array. It is called a calibration shot, and it is the dullest thing in the world. And it is also everything. Because when that shot comes through, the 6 traces step across the paper in a pattern I could have drawn you with my eyes shut. 52 hundredths of a second, microphone 1 to microphone 6. 52 hundredths. I said that number out loud probably 900 times, perhaps more, in 2 seasons, and I said it the way you say a bus route. I had a stopwatch on a bootlace around my neck. That was mine, not the range's. My father gave it to me. Alvy Renshaw was the tape man that season, and he was in there with me. He was about 50, I would guess, and he did crosswords, and he was very good at his job in the narrow sense that the roles were always changed, and the times were always written, and he never once, in 2 seasons, asked me what any of it was for. I want to be honest about the geography because it matters. That trailer was 9 miles from the nearest occupied building. The field phone ran to a shack that nobody sat in until 6. There was a truck outside, and it started, and it ran, and I did not use it. I thought about it. I am going to say that plainly because it is true, and because a man who says he never thought about it is telling you a different kind of story. At 10 minutes to 4, we got an event. Small, even, correct spread. I put it in the log as a truck door about 2 miles up, which is what it probably was, and it may well have been a truck door about 2 miles up, and if the morning had stopped there, I would never have thought about it again in my life. At 4 minutes past 4, we got one with no spread at all. All 6 styluses jumped on the same line. Straight down the paper, 6 little vertical marks side by side, as if the 6 of them were sitting on one table. I did not trust my eye at 4 in the morning. I never have. I got the rule out, and I laid it on the paper, and I looked at it against the timing lines, and there was nothing to measure. The difference was not small. It was not there. For about 2 minutes after that, I was a happy man, and I want to give you those 2 minutes because they were the last comfortable place I had. A cable fault. That is what it is. If those 6 lines are bridged somewhere out in the dark, a taped joint gone, a rock through the insulation, a coyote, water in a splice, then all 6 channels are effectively one channel, and every arrival lands on the same line, and everything I am looking at makes perfect sense. It is a 5-minute job with a meter. I said all this out loud to Alvy, walking myself through it, because that is how I think. I got the meter out of the box and set it on the bench, and I was, I would say, pleased. Then, at 4:15, the calibration shot came through. Clean, spread, 52 hundredths, 1 to 6, on the same 6 channels, on the same roll of paper, on the same morning. I put the meter back in the box. I remember doing it carefully, like a man being polite to a room. Then I heard one. That is the part I have never found a way to say that satisfies anybody. I was standing in the doorway. There was an event, and I heard it with my ears, and it came through the doorway, and it also came onto the paper, and when I looked at the paper afterward, the paper agreed with my ears exactly. It arrived at microphone 1, and at microphone 6, and at me, all at once. Microphone 1 was 4.5 miles away. That is about 21 seconds of sound. It is not a subtle thing. 21 seconds is a long time to stand in a doorway, and no echo came back. I should explain that too. Every shot on that baseline came back off the buttes. 8 seconds, more or less. Every time, 200 times, all season, both seasons. You stopped hearing it the way you stop hearing a clock. That morning, nothing came back at all. Not late, not faint, not once. I put my hand up and waited for it, which is a thing I did without deciding to, twice, like a man waiting for a name he knows perfectly well. You could see those buttes from the trailer step by day. 2 of them, low, off to the northeast. A sort of brown that goes purple for about 10 minutes in the evening, and is otherwise the color of a paper sack. Call it 4,000 feet to the near face, give or take. Sound goes out and comes back. So 4,000 out and 4,000 home is 8,000 feet, and 1,100 feet a second puts you at 7 and a bit. We always said 8 and nobody ever corrected it. I have stood on that step and counted it on my fingers for the pleasure of it. I stopped feeding the stove. I want that in, because it is the only thing I did that whole morning that was not procedure. It was 29 degrees, and the stove was the only reason that trailer was livable, and I stopped putting wood in it, and I did it so that I could hear better. It went cold in about 40 minutes, maybe less. Alvy put his coat on and did not say anything about it. I sat there in my coat with the paper going under the styluses and let a stove go out at 4 in the morning in October. And I have thought since that a man who does that has already decided something. There were 11 of them, over 19 minutes or thereabouts. That is the number in my log, and I would not put a number in a log I was not sure of. 11 events, evenly spread through the 19 minutes, and here is the thing I want to say about them. Not one of them was louder than another. Not one was nearer. They did not build. They did not get better at anything. They were the same event 11 times. The way a machine is the same 11 times, I suppose. The 11th came up through the floor. I was in the doorway with the stopwatch running in my hand, and no reason on this earth to be running it. It came from 4.5 miles up that bench, and it came from the doorframe beside my ear, both, and I could feel both of those things being true at once, and I did not move, and I did not stop the watch. Alvy changed the roll. He wrote the time in the margin, because that was his job and he did it, and he said, "That's a new one." Then he sat down and went back to his crossword. I don't hold it against him, and I never did. He had a roll to change. He was not stupid, and I do not think he was brave, and he was not going to be either one of those things at 4 in the morning in October for money. I forgot to write the time in the margin. That sounds like nothing. I have never forgotten it. Not once. Not in 2 seasons. Not on the morning my boy had croup and I came in on 3 hours. It is the first thing your hand does. And in the morning, when the light came up and I sat down with that roll on the bench and went through it properly, the omission was the thing I looked at. Not the 11 marks. The blank margin where my handwriting should have been. I did everything right after that. The rolls went in a box, initialed, on the right day, with the log sheet, and the log sheet said what I have told you. 11 events, no bearing. Nothing about that paperwork was strange. Nobody hid anything and nobody took anything. It went where the season's tapes went. And at the end of the season I checked that array out myself. Every microphone, every splice, every foot of cable on a reel. It was perfect. Sergeant Pitkin had a saying, paper or nothing, and by paper the array was in better shape than it had been in April. I told Ione at breakfast the next day and she believed me immediately, which I found harder than if she hadn't. She put a plate down and she listened to the whole thing, the baseline and the spread and the shot and the 11, and at the end of it she said, "Well, then that's what happened." And she meant it. She was not humoring me, and she has never once in 58 years brought it up in a way that made me sorry I said it. I would have liked an argument. I have wanted an argument about it for 60 years, or something like 60, and I could not get one out of my wife, and Alvy was doing a crossword, and the tape agreed with me, and that is the whole trouble with being right about a thing like that. I am not going to tell you what it was. I never have. I have a shop's worth of ways to be wrong, and I've thought of most of them. There is a stopwatch in a kitchen drawer in my house. It has not been wound since about 1970, and I keep it in with the spoons, which my daughter thinks is funny, and I could not tell you why it lives there. And I cannot hear a sound now. A door in a hotel, a bird, a shot on a hill, without wanting a second microphone on it. 60 years of that. Probably a fault we never found, and I would not be surprised. That happens. Cable does terrible things and October is hard on it. But then again, the shot was right. The needle said he was standing in the yard, and the yard had 4 inches of snow across it with nothing in it. The room was linoleum, and it was warm in one corner and cold in the other, more or less always. There was a base set on a bench with a meter on the front of it, and a swing arm lamp with a dented shade, and a log book ruled in columns, and a chair with my cardigan over the back of it. There was a boiler somewhere down the hall that came up through the building all night and never quite arrived. And there was a mug with a chip out of the rim that I had put tea in at 1:30 and did not drink. My name's Reva Stauffer. I was 23. I dispatched for the motor pool at the village on the proving ground, which was a good job and I think the best one I ever had, 11:30 till 7, and I had been doing it for 9 months, and I think I was very good at it. I say that plainly because it is the load-bearing part of what I am going to tell you. The window over the bench looked out on the yard. 11 trucks, nose in, under one light on a pole. In February there was snow across that yard nearly all month, most years, and if nobody had been out in it, it lay there in one piece, and you could see it lying there in one piece from where I sat. Here is what the job was. Men went out in trucks, they called in. I wrote down who and where and when, in 3 columns, with a ruler under the line so the columns stayed straight. And in the margin, I wrote a number, which was my own habit and nobody asked me for it. A 9 if he was in the yard or just outside it. A 6 if he was out at the near grids. A 3 if he was away out on the salt. That number came off the meter on the front of the set. It goes up when the signal is strong and it goes down when it isn't. Strong means near. That is all it means, and everybody who has ever sat at a radio knows it. I was taught to write a 9, so it could not be mistaken for a 4. I still write it that way. And at the top of every hour I ran a 60-second check, whether anybody wanted one or not. Station by station, down the list, are you there? And they said they were there, and I wrote it. There was one man, Tuckett, who answered the check with a joke nearly every time, and I never once laughed on the air because you do not, and I laughed afterward every single time. I could tell you where a man was before he told me, from the voice, from the needle. 9 months of 11 voices in 11 places, and it goes into you. That was not a gift. That was just listening. I had names for them, privately, which I never used out loud and never wrote down. There was one who said, "If you please," at the end of everything, even at 4 a.m, even about a flat tire. There was one who breathed on the microphone before he spoke, always a little in breath, so I knew who it was before there were words. There was one who put a smile in the middle of a sentence and took it out again. That was the job, really, not the columns. The columns were what was left over. I boarded in the village that winter, in a house with 3 other girls and 1 bathroom. And I slept from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon behind a blanket somebody had nailed over the window. There was a girl called Junelle, who worked days in the same building, and we were friendly, and we almost never saw each other awake. February, there's a strange kind of place to be 23. It is very cold, and I would say very quiet, and everybody is somebody's wife except you. I liked it, I want that said. I was not lonely, and I was not frightened, and I had never in 9 months wanted anybody to come and sit with me. I want you to know how alone that is, though, because I did not know until that night. I was the only person awake in that building. There was a telephone on the wall that reached a switchboard that did not answer at 3 in the morning. The men on the net were out in the dark somewhere, and they were not company, they were work. And that was fine, and I liked it, and it never once bothered me before or after. At 3:20, a station called in from grid marker 17. Grid 17 was 81 miles out or thereabouts. I knew the number without looking because I had written it maybe 400 times. The needle said 9. I looked at it. I looked at the log. I looked back at it. A 9 is a man in the yard leaning on a fender with a hand-carried set on his hip. A 9 is not 81 miles. 81 miles is not a 3 either. 81 miles on a 5-watt set you do not get at all, which is precisely why the trucks carry the big sets and the men carry the little ones for walking around a vehicle. So I asked him to say it again, which I was entitled to do and did 4 or 5 times a night for all kinds of reasons. He said it again. Same voice, same needle. And then he gave me the distance himself, or I understood him to, in miles unprompted, the way a man does when he is being helpful about where to send somebody. And it was 81, and the needle was 9, and those two things do not go together on this earth. Then I did the sensible thing, and I was proud of myself for about a minute. Skip. That is what it was. Cold air over that valley in February will duct a signal, and the men had been talking about it all winter as if it were weather, which it is, or a relay stuck in the repeater and a station coming in on a path it had no business on. Either way, it was radio, and radio does things, and there is a language for it. I composed the sentence I was going to write in the log's own voice, and I liked it very much. Station reading S9 from grid 17, suspected ducting. That is a good sentence, and I was 23 and pleased with it. Then, everybody else went quiet. Not busy, quiet. There were 11 stations on that net, and on a normal night there is somebody on it every minute or two. A truck at a gate, a man wanting a tow, a man wanting to know if the mess was open, Tuckett being funny. And for 19 minutes, or as near to 19 as the page says, there was nothing on it at all except the one voice, at 9. I ran the check. It was not the top of the hour, and I ran it anyway, and I got nothing back from anybody. And I remember being embarrassed, as if I had spoken out of turn in a room. The boilers stopped too, and the pole light out there had a hum you could hear through the glass in February, and I could not hear it. So I got up and went to the window, because the needle said the yard. That is what I want you to understand about why I did it. I was not being brave. I had a piece of equipment telling me a man was 30 feet away, and I went to look at where he would be. It was the most ordinary thing in the world to do. I was still holding the microphone, and the cord came out straight behind me across the room, and I remember exactly how that felt. The little tug of it, like a dog on a lead that has run out. The yard was 11 trucks and 1 pole light and 4 inches of snow. There was no boot print, there was no tire track, there was no bird. That snow had come down at about 8 in the evening, or somewhere near it, and nothing had been across it since, not in one single place, and I could see all of it because the pole light is in the middle, and that yard is not big. Behind me, the needle was sitting where it sits when a man leans on a fender. I keyed the microphone, and I did not say anything. I held it keyed for I do not know how long. 3 seconds, maybe 5, with my thumb down, and nothing in my mouth, and then I let it go. That is the only unprofessional thing I did in 9 months, and I have never forgiven myself for it, and I could not tell you what I would have said. The voice gave the grid marker twice more, 17 and then 17 again in the same helpful tone. Then it stopped. 4 more minutes of nothing. Then a truck at the main gate called in at a 6, wanting to know if I had a running total, and everything was completely ordinary again, and it stayed ordinary for the rest of my life. Mrs. Overson came in at 6 with her coat still on and read the page. She read the whole 19 minutes and the column of 9s, and she said, "Log it." Then she initialed the bottom of the page, and she put the kettle on, and she asked me whether I wanted walking over to breakfast, which she did not normally do. I have thought about that kindness for 60 years. I think it was real. It was also the entire end of the matter. I asked for that book when they retired it in 1964, and somebody let me have it, because it was going in a bin. It is in a case in my front room. 19 minutes of one station and a column of 9s in my handwriting and a woman's initials underneath. I have shown that page to 2 people in 60 years, and neither of them knew what they were looking at, which is fair, because it is a page of a logbook. It proves nothing at all. I have never once said that it proved anything. I got walked over to breakfast, and I ate a great deal of it, and I slept, I am told, like a stone. I did not look at that yard in the morning. I mean, I did, in the sense that a person walks past a window, but I did not go and stand at it and study it, and I could have, and it would have taken 4 seconds, and I have never quite decided why I didn't, and I probably never will. I will say one thing about that country in February because I think it belongs. By daylight, with snow on the salt, distance stops meaning anything out there anyway. The white on the ground and the white in the sky come together, and a mountain 9 miles off and a mountain 40 miles off look like the same mountain in 2 sizes, and a truck coming up the road is a black mark that does not seem to move for a quarter of an hour, and then is at the gate. Everybody who lived there knew that. We used to joke about it in the mess. You cannot tell how far anything is here, and it was funny, and nobody meant anything by it. So perhaps I had been taught all winter, without noticing, that distance out there was a thing you were allowed to be wrong about. I stayed another 2 years on that job, and I was still good at it, and nothing else ever happened. Present day, I will tell you the one thing it left. I will not judge a distance by a voice. On the telephone, if somebody says they are on their way, I ask them where they are, and then a minute later I ask them again. My children think it is a charming thing their mother does. My son does an impression of it. Cold air does carry. It carries for hundreds of miles, apparently, and everybody who was ever on a radio has a story about it, and mine is very likely one of those, and I would not argue with anybody who said so. But then again, he read like he was in the yard, and he was not in the yard. Dilution is not an opinion, it is a rule, and it was the only rule the study had, and on the 18th of September it stopped working in my hands in ordinary daylight. 3 filters weighed the same. 2 towers 41 miles apart, and a blank that had been open for 1 minute, and all 3 of them the same to the 10th of a milligram. My name's Claudia Whipple. I was 36. I ran the field end of a university air quality study on the West Desert, on the outside of the proving grounds boundary, and before that I had weighed filters in a basement laboratory for 6 years, which is the part of my history that matters here. Ask me what a 1/10 of a milligram is, and I will not give you a number. I will tell you what it looks like on a pan 2 minutes after you have shut the door and stopped breathing on it. That is not a boast. It is 6 years of a very small job, and I would not claim more than that. The study was dull and useful. How much dust is in the air in a dry valley on a normal day with nothing happening? You need to know that before you can say anything about a day when something does. So, 2 towers roughly. The near one on the valley floor, close enough to the boundary that I could read the posted signs from the truck. The far one, 41 miles downwind, up on a bench in the mountains on the west side. Each tower was a pole, a pump that ran off a battery, a filter head, and an anemometer that ticked, and the ticking is the sound I hear when I think about that autumn. 40 minutes off the pavement on a 2-track. I drove a Bronco with a heater that worked when it felt like it, and I drove the last mile at 8 miles an hour because the balance was in a padded case on the seat, and a field balance on a washboard road is a thing you can hear worrying. That case made a particular noise, a sort of soft knock twice a second when the corrugations were bad, and if I went slow enough it stopped. And finding the speed where it stopped was the closest thing I had to a radio. 8 miles an hour, every morning, the last mile at 8, with the sun not up and the sage going past the window at the speed of a person walking. I should say something about the signs. The near tower stood where it stood because the boundary was there. That was the whole reason for the study's geography, and the signs were part of my view every single morning. White, on posts. At intervals you could pace, saying what those signs say. Restricted, no entry, keep out. Some of them were old, and some of them were new, and one of them had been shot, or looked as if it had. Which out there is not a statement. It is just what happens to a metal sign in a place where men have rifles. I never once wanted to go past them. I want that on the record because people always ask. Not out of nerves, it simply never came up in me. I had a job on my side of the line, and it was a good job, and I like the line being there, in the way you like a wall in a house. The routine. Every morning, cassettes out of numbered envelopes, pre-weighed in the lab. Lift them with forceps, never fingers. Change them at the near tower, drive round, change them at the far tower, and everything goes back into its envelope with its number on it. And every day, a blank. I want to explain the blank properly because it is the whole story. A field blank is a cassette you open for exactly 1 minute at the near tower, and then seal again and treat like all the others. It is the filter that is supposed to weigh nothing. It exists so that if something is wrong, with your hands, your envelopes, your truck, your balance, your day, the blank will show it. 60 seconds of air is not air. You are proving that the process is clean. I ran a blank every single day for 9 weeks, and every single one came back at nothing. I was alone on that ridge. There was no radio in the study's budget, which I will say dryly and leave there. Dwayne Messervy had the far tower that week, or most of it, and we met at the gap at 11. And between 7 and 11 I was 40 minutes from a paved road in September, and the road was empty in September. The first thing was a truck. A range truck came up the boundary road about a mile out, going east, or I took it for east, and it pulled a tail of dust behind it the way everything does out there. I watched it because there was nothing else to watch, and that dust came across a mile of open ground in a 9-mile-an-hour wind and arrived at my tower without thinning. I want to be exact. I did not measure that. That is my eye. But my eye is a professional instrument in this one narrow thing, because I had spent 9 weeks watching dust come at that pole from every direction and go thin doing it. Dust spreads. It has to. There is more room the further out you go and the same amount of dust to fill it. And that tail arrived, as near as I could judge it, as thick at my boots as it had been at his tires. Then I noticed the smell, which is to say I noticed there wasn't one. Dawn on that ground always smells of something. Sage, mostly. Salt when the wind is off the flats. Diesel if anybody has been passed. Wet dust if there has been any rain in the county at all. And there was nothing. I stood with my mouth open a little to taste the air, which is a thing I have done since I was a child, and which my mother could not break me of, and there was nothing in it. There were no insects on the pump housing either. By September, that housing is a small graveyard, and part of my morning was brushing it off with the side of my hand. Now, here is where I was happy for an hour, and it was one of the nicest hours I can remember, and I would like it on the record that I have never been so pleased to be doing maintenance. The balance. I got back to the truck at about 9:30, perhaps a little after, and weighed the near filter and the far filter as a matter of routine, and they came out the same, and I thought, the balance has gone. Of course it has. It has been in a Bronco on a washboard for 9 weeks. The knife edges, the pan, the damping, the level bubble, the case latch, the fact that it had spent August at 104 degrees. I have a whole vocabulary for how a field balance goes wrong, and I used all of it out loud to nobody, sitting on the tailgate. I started a list of what I would check when I got it back to the university. I was a technician with a maintenance problem. That is a solved and pleasant thing to be. So I re-zeroed it with the Class S weights. They came in a wooden box with felt cutouts, and you lift them with forceps, and you do not talk while you do it. It was correct. I weighed both filters again. 4 times, or it may have been 5, alternating, near, far, and I wrote all 8 numbers down, same, not close, the same. And then I did the blank, because the blank is what you do when you do not understand something. And I picked the cassette up with my fingers. That was bare fingers on a filter cassette after 6 years of forceps. It ruins it. I knew it as I was doing it, the way you know you have put your hand on a hot pan while your hand is still going. And I was still holding that ruined thing when the number came up, and the number was the same as the other 2. 1 minute of open air on a ridge, 41 miles of downwind, and whatever was in the valley at 7 in the morning. All 3 to the 10th of a milligram, on a balance I had just proved twice. I stood there for a while. I want to be careful, because I think people expect a certain sort of feeling here, and it was not that. I was not frightened. Nothing happened around me. A raven went over going north, I think, and I watched it. My hands were cold, and it was cold, so my hands were doing what hands do. It was very quiet, and I would say very ordinary, and September light on the salt at 7 is one of the finest things I have ever been paid to stand in. What I felt was the specific vertigo of arithmetic that has stopped working. If you have not had it, I cannot make you have it. Something you use every day the way you use a floor is now a thing you are looking at, and you are standing on nothing while you look. I will tell you the one thing about the raven, and then I am going to leave it, because I have left it for 40 years. It went over me north at maybe 200 feet, and its shadow came across the ground in front of the truck, and the shadow was sharp, or that is how it looked to me. Not soft at the edges the way a shadow is when the thing casting it is a long way from the ground. Sharp, like a hand's shadow on a table. That is all. I did not look up again, and I do not think I could have followed it, and I have never mentioned it in any account of that morning until now. I decided at the time not to think about it, and I want to be honest that it was a decision and not an oversight. The rest of the morning, the light was completely normal, and my own shadow was as soft as it should have been at that hour. And I looked at my own shadow twice to check, which tells you where I was. I met Dwayne at the Gap at 11, and he was eating a sandwich. I told him. He said, "So it's the balance." And he took it out of the case himself and set it on the tailgate and leveled it and re-zeroed it with the weights in front of me, and it was fine. And he said, "Huh," and asked me if I wanted half of the sandwich. I did want half. I telephoned Dr. Lindstrom from a call box in Tuil that evening and read him the numbers, and he said, "Do it again," which was the right thing to say and what I would have said. And I did do it again. The next day was completely ordinary. Near tower, a normal load. Far tower, a third of it, which is about right for 41 miles, near enough. Blank at nothing. And the day after, and the day after that, for the rest of the study. And those are the numbers that went into the report. and the report is a boring document about background dust in a dry valley, and there is nothing wrong with it. I never sent in the 3 from that morning. I numbered around them. I have thought perhaps 1,100 times about whether that was dishonest, and I am still not sure, and I have come out in different places on different years. The reason I gave myself at the time was that 3 filters I could not account for would have taken the whole study down with them, and it was somebody's doctorate. That was true. It is also true that I did not want to write them on a form. The Near Towers cassette from that morning is in an envelope in a drawer in my house, with the pencils. I have never opened it. I could weigh it tomorrow on a better balance than I have ever used, and I am not going to. And I have looked at the outside of that envelope more often than I am going to say on a recording. About 20 years on, I sat down with a newspaper, and there was a piece in it about that valley. Nothing to do with me. Land and water and who was going to have which. And there was one paragraph in it about the desert out there and the things people say about it, in that tone newspapers use, half amused, and I put the paper down and did something else, and I did not finish the piece, and I have never gone and found it since. That is not a dramatic act. It is a woman putting a newspaper down, but I noticed myself doing it, and I have not forgotten noticing. Present day, I weigh everything twice. Flour, coffee, parcels. My daughter finds it very funny, and I let her. There's probably an explanation. I have thought of 4, and every one of them is worse than not having one, and one of the 4 is that I may simply have mixed up 2 envelopes in a truck at 9:30 in the morning, and I would rather that were true than anything else on the list. But then again, I did the blank last, and I did it with my fingers, and I knew exactly which one it was. A lens can only be sharp at one distance at a time. That is not a rule somebody made. That is what a lens is. I ran the focus from infinity all the way down to 4 feet with my eye on the ground glass, slowly, evenly, through the whole travel of the barrel, and it did not go soft at any point. My name's Gilbert Skoosen. I was 41 that June. I photographed trials for the range instrumentation people on the proving ground, and I had been behind a ground glass, one way and another, for 21 years. I can tell you a lens's focal length by how a fence goes soft behind a face. That is not a talent. That is what happens to a man who has done one thing for a long time. The bunker was concrete, 1 room and a slab, a steel door propped open with a bar because otherwise it swung, a slot in the wall with a sliding plate, and a fan in the corner that moved hot air from one part of that room to another part of it. June, 10 in the morning, or a little before, 96 degrees and climbing. And it does climb out there at a rate that surprises people from anywhere else. I had 2 cameras that morning. A Fast-Stax on a tripod bolted to the floor, which is a high-speed machine that spins film past a prism and does not so much start as wind itself up, and I hated the noise of it and I think I loved it. And a 35 with a long lens on a geared head, which was mine to do what I liked with, and which is the one this story is about. The Fast-Stax winds up. That is the only word for it. You throw the switch and it goes up through a whine into a howl, and it takes 1.5 seconds to get where it is going. And then it eats 100 feet of film in about as long as it takes to say so. In a concrete room, that noise gets into your back teeth. And a hot camera has a smell, which people do not expect. Warm metal and warm oil and warm film base, a sort of sweet smell. And if you have been in a bunker in June, you know it before you are through the door. Loading in that heat is its own misery. You do it in a changing bag, which is a black rubber sack with 2 sleeves in it, in 96 degrees, with your arms in up to the elbows and your face about a foot from the outside of it, and your hands sweating on film you cannot see. I did 4 magazines that morning before 9, or 3, I would not swear to it, and my shirt was through by the second one. Out through the slot, the grid, numbered stakes in a pattern, laid out on the flat, and then the playa going white the way it does by 10, and then a mountain at the far end of the view that I had photographed 100 times, probably more, and could have drawn. There was a focus chart on a stake at 30 feet. I want to explain that because everything in this rests on it. Before every run, I shot 4 frames of that chart, so that whoever reduced the film later had a reference. This is what sharp looks like, on this lens, on this day, at a known distance. It took 11 seconds about. I did it maybe 4,000 times in my life, perhaps more than that. 4 frames, chart, stake number in the log, done. That is the whole trade, really. You put numbers on things so that later on nobody has to remember. Depth of field, if you want it. At a given aperture, there is a band in front of the lens that comes out acceptably sharp, and it is shallow when you are close and deeper when you are far, and at a long focal length it is a knife. I explain it at parties with 2 coins on a table, near one and far one, and everybody nods and nobody cares, and I still do it. 21 years, if you want the list. A bridge in Idaho going in, and 6 years later, the same bridge coming out. Rocket sleds, a hail damage survey for an insurance company, which was 6 weeks of photographing dents in car roofs, and is the most money I ever made in a summer. 2 seasons of high-speed work on engine parts letting go, which nobody should have to look at frame by frame. A wedding, as a favor once, which I hated with my whole heart. And then 11 years out on that ground photographing trials, which is the work I would go back and do again tomorrow. I have photographed things nobody believed. Every single one of them was on the negative. And once it is on the negative, it is not an argument anymore. It is a piece of paper with a number on the back. The grid was sealed that morning. That is a normal thing. On a trial day, nobody crosses until the all clear, and the all clear is not mine to give. And that is exactly why I was in a concrete box on my own with a field phone that reached Major Tolliver 9 miles away, and nobody else in the world. So, the first thing was that there was something standing out past the stakes, on sealed ground, where nothing may be, for the plain and boring reason that men who might have been out there are all somewhere else being counted. It was not a vehicle, and it was not a man, and it was not any marker I knew. And I had photographed every kind of marker they had. And I did about the only thing a man in a bunker can do about a question of distance, which is to range it by focus. I put the long lens on it and brought it up sharp. And I read the footage scale, and the scale said 400 feet. Then, because that was wrong for the size of it, I went past, and it came sharp again at 1100. Then I took it to infinity, and it was sharp there too. Now I was delighted. I want to give that to you properly, because it was real, and it lasted maybe 20 minutes, 25, and it was the last easy thing in my day. A sticking helical, a decentered element, a shim gone, a spacer walked, a bad batch of glass, I have seen all of it, and every one of those is an afternoon in a form and a lens going back in a padded box to somebody whose whole job is fixing lenses. I took it off the body. I put it on the chart. Sharp at the chart, soft off it, exactly as it should be, I put it on the mountain. Sharp on the mountain, soft on the stakes. I put it on a stake at 100 feet. Perfect. I put it back on the chart. Perfect. I put it on the second body and ran the whole thing again, and it was perfect. Then I put it back on the first body, and I was gentle with it. The way you are gentle with an animal you have just accused of something. I did use the telephone. I want that in. I wound the handle, and I got Major Tolliver. And I said there was something standing out on the grid past the stakes in those words, because those were the only words I had that were not an interpretation. And there was a pause of about 4 seconds, it seemed to me, and he said, "Hold your position." He said it kindly. I have thought about those 4 seconds for 50 years, and I cannot get anything out of them, and I am not going to invent anything. He may have been writing. He may have been talking to somebody. He said, "Hold your position," which is what a man in that chair says to a man in a bunker on a sealed grid, and it was correct, and I held my position, and he never mentioned it to me again, not once, in the 4 years we both worked there. And I put it back out through the slot, and I racked it. That is the part I would like to describe carefully, and then I will stop. I had my eye on the ground glass. My right hand was on the barrel, and I turned it slowly and evenly, the way you do when you are hunting the exact plane and do not want to overshoot, all the way from the infinity stop down through the numbers, 1,000, 500, 300, 150, and it did not soften. Not at any point in that travel, not a little. And in the same frame, the chart stake at 30 feet came up soft, and then hard, and then soft again exactly as it is supposed to, which is how I know it was not my eye, and not the glass, and not the day. I took it down to 4 feet, which is the stop, which is where the barrel will not go any further. Still sharp, and the stake at 30 feet sharp in the same frame. There was no shimmer anywhere in that view. It was 96 degrees on a playa at 10 in the morning in June. I have spent 21 years of my life fighting heat distortion, waiting it out, shooting through it, cursing it, and I know the absence of it the way you know a room with the clock taken out. I will say what it looked like once, and then I would rather not go back over it. I could not resolve it, and it was in perfect focus, and I want somebody to sit with that sentence for a minute. There was an outline, or something I took for one, and there was nothing usable inside it. The parts of it my eye kept going to were the parts that had nothing in them. No face, nothing I would call a limb, no mark, no seam, no join, and no place where it ended and the salt began. And I had 4,000 frames of practice at finding exactly that kind of edge. I shot most of a magazine without pulling the dark slide. I knew it while I was doing it. That is a thing every man who has used a plate camera has done exactly once as a boy and never again. And I did it at 41 with the slide's handle about 3 inches from my hand, and I went on doing it, and I do not have one frame from those 3 minutes, or however long it was. I kept turning the barrel because as long as I was turning the barrel, I had not decided anything. It never came near me. It did not move at all, not once, and nothing looked at me, and I was not approached, and I want to say twice that nothing at any moment did anything to me, because that seems to disappoint people, and it is the truth. The all clear came about 1 o'clock, and I walked out onto that grid with a light meter in my hand in the middle of the day, and there were stakes, and there was salt, and there was nothing else, and I did not find so much as a mark. I looked for one for about half an hour, perhaps longer. There is no mark in this story. Sherm Duckworth in the lab that afternoon held the wet strip up by one corner and said, "Nice glass." Then he handed it back and went on with his tanks, because he looked at 400 feet of film a day, and this was film. The lens went to the bench, and 2 men tested it in front of me, and it was perfect. It stayed in service another 6 years, near enough, and I used it every week, and it never did anything of the kind again. I kept a contact strip. It shows exactly what I have told you, and it proves nothing, because a strip of film is not an argument. I will say one thing about it, and I will not push it. There is no grain in the emulsion where the thing is. Everywhere else on that frame there is grain, because there is always grain, not there. The trial's own footage went in and got reduced and got reported, and was entirely ordinary. Present tense, I cannot focus a camera without running it to both stops first. Every time. My grandchildren think it is hilarious, and I let them think it, and they will do it themselves one day without knowing why. and I have not photographed anything since that I could not walk up to. Weddings, dogs, a boat, things at arm's length. The strip went in an envelope, and the envelope in a shoebox, and the shoebox in a drawer, and the drawer in a garage. My daughter asked me once what it was, and I said it was from work. Depth of field is arithmetic. You cannot argue with arithmetic, and I do not think I have ever tried. But then again, there is the strip. The ground out there is flat within inches for 40 miles, and on a morning in November the instrument said the ground under my boots was 91 feet below the ground, 300 feet away, and I could see the man's boots at my own eye level while it said so. I was 23. My name's Hazel Clough, and I held a rod for a survey party on the proving ground when it was not 2 years old, which is to say when there was almost nothing out there but what we were putting in. How I got there was a notice on a board in Toul, I believe it was Toul, and a bus. My mother thought it was a mistake, and said so, and was wrong, and never took it back, and I did not need her to. The place then was tents in rows and a graded strip and a water truck and a mess that ran out of everything by Thursday. There was a girl from Nafi who cried the whole first week and stayed 4 years, and she was at my husband's funeral. There was a stove in our tent that we fought over like sisters, and a rule about the stove that we made up ourselves and enforced more strictly than anything the Army ever gave us. You were cold from October to March, and you did not mention it, because a woman who mentioned it was a woman who might be sent home, and none of us wanted to go home. I had a coat and a sweater under it that my mother knitted while she was telling me not to go, and I wore that sweater until 1951. Mr. Pettingill was the party chief. He was maybe 55 or thereabouts, and he had a pocket watch on a chain and a thermos with a dent in it. And he had one habit I've never been able to explain. He called every woman on that party by her surname and every man by his first name. Miss Clough, all day, every day for 2 years, and Marlowe and Clifton and Vaughan, nobody ever asked him about it. I have decided since that it was respect, and I have also decided since that it was distance, and I think it was both, and I liked him. We were laying out grids. That is all I am going to say about the purpose of it, because I did not know the purpose of it then, and I do not know it now. We put stakes in flat ground in straight lines, and we wrote down how high the ground was, and men came along afterward and did whatever they did. Running levels, they call it. There is an instrument on a tripod, and it is set dead level, and it looks through a telescope at a rod. The rod is 13 feet of wood with a scale up the face of it and a target you can slide, and you hold it plumb on a point, and the instrument man reads the number where the crosshair cuts it. That number tells you how high that point is compared to where he is standing. You do that 1,000 times and you have the shape of the ground. I read a rod for 2 years, and I never once read one wrong, because Mr. Pettingill would have put me on the water truck, and I like the rod. 2 things about the trade, and then I will go on. The first is the 2-peg test. Every single morning, before anything, you prove the instrument. You set it up between 2 pegs a good way apart and read both. Then you move it and read both again from somewhere else. If the difference between the pegs is the same both times, the instrument is telling you the truth. If it isn't, and you adjust it or you send it in. It is the dullest 10 minutes of a surveyor's day, and every person who has ever run levels has had it drilled into them, and I still know it in my hands. The second is mine. Before the instrument man wrote anything down, I read the rod aloud twice. That was not asked of me. Nobody could hear me at 300 feet in a wind, and I did it anyway, because a number you have said twice is a number you have thought about. The rod itself you hold with 2 fingers and let hang. You do not grip it. If you grip it, you fight it and it goes crooked. 2 fingers and it finds plumb by itself, and that is the whole art of standing there. That morning was the 11th of November. 20 degrees at 8 in the morning and no wind. I am going to say that again, because on that flat there is always wind. Always. That flat is mostly wind with salt in it. And there was none. Not a breath at 8 in the morning. And I remember thinking that I did not have to fight the rod and that it was a kindness. We were spread over about 3 miles, I would say. I was on the far rod, out of shouting range, which means arm signals only. One hand up over your head, raise the target. One hand down, lower it. Both hands out and level. Hold plumb. A slow beckon, come in, and one the party had made up ourselves, which was both arms straight out flat and held there, and meant lunch, and which every man on that line could read at half a mile in a wind. You get used to a whole day of work with nobody's voice in it. I liked that too. And I walked, that autumn, I would guess 200 miles or so in a straight line and never got anywhere. The truck was a mile back, with the water and the lunch in it. There was not one thing between me and that instrument except air and salt, and no trees, no rocks, no fences, nothing at all out there to be taller than. The first reading of the morning put me 11 feet low. Now that is absurd. On that ground, 11 feet is a canyon. So I assumed the obvious thing, which is that I had the target set wrong, and I reset the target and I stood again. Then Mr. Judd waved me 6 feet north, 6 or 7, and it said 29 feet low, same ground, same crust. I stamped on it, which I remember because you do not stamp on salt crust. It breaks, and it broke. And it was the same crust it had been 6 feet back and the same crust it had been every day that autumn. I should say what that ground is like under boots in November, since it turns out to matter to me. In summer it is hard, and it rings a little, and it will take the skin off your palm. In November, after any wet at all, there is a crust on it about as thick as a china plate, and you go through it with every step, and it makes a sound, a particular one. A dry sound, halfway between a biscuit and thin ice, and at 20 degrees on still air you can hear a man walking 300 yards off, or near enough to it. That was how you knew somebody was coming up behind you out there. Not by looking, by the crust. And it was doing all of that. Under my boots that morning, the whole time, exactly as it should. That was ordinary ground making its ordinary noise while a proved instrument told me it was 91 feet under the rest of the county. Then we thought it was the rod, and it was a lovely idea, and everybody liked it. A bent extension, a slipped clamp, a target that had crept in the cold. Mr. Judd waved me in, and I walked the mile to the truck for the second rod, and I was glad of the walk because it was 20 degrees, and I had been standing. We stood the 2 rods side by side. We read them against each other. They agreed to 100th of a foot, which is about as close as 2 rods ever get, and the wrong reading came back with both of them. By then, we were out at 300 feet, and the book said 91 feet below. I could see Mr. Judd's boots. That is the part. 300 feet on that flat, in clear air at 8 in the morning in November, and I could see his boots plainly under the tripod, and I could see the tripod's own 3 feet on the ground, and I could see the truck a mile behind him. His boots were level with my eyes. I think I know what level with my eyes looks like. Every human being does, and a person who has held a rod for 2 years knows it better than most. There was no shimmer, and there was no mirage. I want to be specific about that because a mirage would have been a comfort. A mirage is a thing you can name. I had named 100 of them that autumn, probably more. Out there, floating mountains and lakes and trucks with their wheels off the ground, and you say, "Oh, that's the heat," and you laugh, and you go on. At 8 in the morning in November at 20 degrees, on dead calm air, there is no heat to blame and nothing to name, and everything out there was exactly as sharp as it ought to be. So we ran the 2-peg test. Then and there, in the middle of the morning, in the middle of the line, with the book open. Mr. Judd ran it, and it was perfect. Then I ran it, because he let me, and I ran it from the other end, and it was perfect. We swapped ends and did it again, and it was perfect. That instrument was telling the truth by every means either of us had of asking it. And then he sighted the rod again, and it said 91 feet below. I read it aloud twice, and nobody wrote it down. So I read it a third time, out loud, into the cold, to nobody at all. And then I lowered the rod off my shoulder and put my hand flat on the ground. It was ground, it was cold, and it was crusty, and it had salt in it, and it was exactly the ground I had walked out on. And there was no sound. I have been in quiet places since, but I have never been anywhere as quiet as that flat at 20 degrees with no wind. And there was nothing to look at in any direction, which is the thing about that country that no photograph gets. And I stood there holding a rod in one hand, with my other hand on the dirt like a woman checking a stove. Mr. Pettingill walked up from the instrument. He had the book. He looked at the page. Then he took the pencil out of the spiral and wrote the number down himself in his own hand, and he said, "Note it." Then he called the next station and the day went on. That is what happened. He was not unkind, and I do not believe he was frightened, and he did not say another word about it, and we ran the rest of the line. And at lunch we all sat on the running board of the truck and ate, and nobody brought it up. I was 23, and I took my lead from the men, and the men had decided it was a number to note. In the afternoon they ran that same line again. It came out correct. Correct to 100th the whole way. The ground as flat as it had always been. That page is right behind the other page in the book, and on the first page, beside the reading, Mr. Judd had written the word check. I never saw that book again. I do not know where those field books went, and I do not say that in a way that means anything. They went where paper went. There was a war on, and a very great deal of paper. I stayed until 47, or the spring of 48. Then I married and moved to Ogden and had a life, and I have not held a rod since 1947, and I could hold one plum tomorrow. Here is what it left. I do not trust flat ground, that is all. It sounds like nothing. But when I'm on flat ground, I look for something to be taller than a post, a car, a hydrant, a person, and I put myself next to it, and I cannot tell you why that helps, and perhaps it doesn't. And I've been doing it for 80 years. My son took me out to the salt flats to watch cars once, 30 years ago now, perhaps more. Great crowd and flags, and a man doing something with a very loud engine. And I got out of the car and stood up and looked at all that flat with nothing on it. And I turned around and got back in. And he was good about it. It was probably the instrument, I suppose, whatever the peg said. Instruments are things men made, and men make them wrong. But then again, we tested it twice, and I was the one holding the tape. My uncle used to say 110 at a mile sounds like a fly in a jar. That was a real thing men could do once. Price a machine by the sound of it across open country. And he taught me and I could do it. I drove 11 miles at a thing one night and 11 miles back away from it, and it never got one bit louder or one bit quieter, and I know how that sounds. My name's Byron Hatch. I was 22, and I was helping on a water well job at a spring down on the south side of the proving ground, in the old stage road country, in August of 1959. About my uncle, since he is the reason I have a story at all. He drilled water in 3 states for 40 years, near enough, and he was dead 2 years by that August, and he had taught me the way men taught things then, which is that you stood next to him and he did not explain, and then one day you could do it. He would stop the truck on a rise and say, "What's that?" And you would listen, and you would say, "A tractor," and he would say, "What kind?" And you would say, "I don't know." And he would say, "Then keep listening and drive on." By the time I was 19, I could get inside 20% on a distance off an engine, most times. I still can. I do it in parking lots and nobody knows I am doing it. And he had that saying about the fly in the jar, and what it means is that a big machine, a long way off, does not get quieter so much as it gets smaller and tighter and thinner, and the sound loses its bottom end first. That is the whole trick. You are not listening to how loud. You are listening to what is missing out of it. Nothing was missing out of what I heard that night. It had all of its bottom end. It had the whole of itself. We were putting a well down for a grazing outfit. Cable tool rig, which is the old way, a heavy bit on a line, and a walking beam that lifts it and drops it, and it pounds a hole in the ground about as fast as a man can grow a beard, more or less. You listen to it all day. You learn what the bit is in from how it comes back up the line. Clay is one sound, and rock is another, and a man who cannot tell them apart is no use to anybody. There was a spring there, and a stone corral falling down on one side, and a cottonwood, and that was the whole camp. That corral was dry-laid stone, no mortar, waist high, and somebody had put a lot of work into it a long time before any of us, I would guess a great deal before. Bill Meeks had two things he said about it, and both of them were untrue. He said the stage company built it, which it did not, because the stage road is a good way off from that spring, and I have since looked at a map, and he said there was a man buried in the north wall, which there was not, and which he only ever said after dark. I liked that corral. I ate my supper sitting on it every night that summer, and it was still warm at 9 o'clock from the day. Lon Saugers was the driller, and Bill Meeks was the tool pusher, or that is what he called himself, and they slept in the truck at the rig. I put my cot on the far side of the corral, because a rig ticks while it cools, and it will keep you awake for an hour or two if you let it. 70 miles to a town. The nearest house was up the valley 26 miles, and I know the number because I drove it for a fan belt in July, and a woman sold it to me out of a shed and gave me a peach. There was a posted boundary 9 miles north of my cot. I read the sign on it once, in daylight, out of curiosity, and it said what those signs say, and I went back to the truck. August, out there is 104 by noon and 61 at 2 in the morning, and you want a blanket at 2 in the morning, which nobody from anywhere else believes. And the stars come all the way down to the ground on 3 sides, not to a tree line, to the ground. There is a wind that comes up about 4 in the afternoon every day, and it is not a relief, it is hot, and it has grit in it, and it goes on till dark. And there is a smell that comes if it rains, which that summer it did once, for about 11 minutes, and I have never smelled anything like it before or since. Wet dust and sage and something like a struck match. Every man on that rig stopped working and stood in it, and nobody said anything, and then it was over, and we went back to work. I say that because it is the only other time out there that a thing happened to me I could not put a size to. Now, the lid. I had a coffee can lid I kept by the cot, and I used to bang it. Flat, with the heel of my hand, hard, once. And it would come back off the buttes east of us about 2 seconds later, a little flat crack of it. And I did that most nights that summer. Nearly all of them because I was 22 and there was nothing else to do. Lon told me twice to quit it. I did not quit it. That is the whole of me before this happened. A young man on a cot with a piece of tin. The first thing was that there were no coyotes. There were coyotes at that spring every night of that summer. Every single night. They start up somewhere south and they get going, and it is a sound I think I have loved my whole life. And that night there was not one, and I lay there listening for them the way you listen for a clock that has stopped, where you cannot say when it stopped, only that the room is wrong. I want to be plain that nothing was the matter with them. They were back the next night, I am fairly sure of it. They were back the night after that, and I heard them for 2 more weeks. Nothing was ever wrong with those animals, and I've been careful about that all my life when I tell it. The second thing was a diesel at idle, at the volume of 1, parked 10 feet away. I want that understood exactly, because it is the whole story. Not far off, not carried on the air, 10 feet. The sound a machine makes when it is right there and you could put your hand on the hood. And I lay there and did what my ears do, which I cannot help. And I said to myself, that's a 6-cylinder. That's maybe 165 horse. That's got a bad injector on the number 2. I would have priced it. I would have told you the make. There was nothing parked anywhere. There was the rig, cold and quiet, and our truck 200 yards off with 2 men asleep in it, and a spring, and a corral. Then I worked it out, and I was pleased with myself, and I would like to have those 20 minutes again just to be that stupid and that comfortable. An inversion. Lon had told me about it in July, sitting on the running board. On a still night out there, the cold air lies down on the flat and the warm sits on top of it, and sound will run along the underside of that like water in a pipe for miles and miles, and come up somewhere far off as loud as if it were next to you. It is a real thing. Men who work that country know it and joke about it. Somebody had a compressor running on the ranges 20 miles north, and I was hearing it down the pipe. So I lay back down. I felt foolish, and I felt fine, and I remember pulling the blanket up, or I think I do. Then I got up and walked the camp, because after about 20 minutes I noticed it had no side. That is the best way I can put it. A sound has a side. You turn your head, and one ear gets more of it. I walked the corral. I walked to the rig and put my hand on the walking beam. I walked 200 yards up the 2-track and stood in the middle of it and held my breath, and then walked back down and held my breath again. It was about the same everywhere. It was not louder anywhere. It was not quieter anywhere. It was not in front of me or behind me, and it was not up, and I checked up. Lon sat up in the cab about then with his hat off, and I know he heard it because he sat up. He listened for maybe 10 seconds. He said, "That's a truck." And he lay back down. In the morning, he never said one word about it. Not at breakfast, not on the rig, not that whole week, and I never asked him. And he is dead now. And that is the part I bring up when I tell this. Not the sound. The fact that a 50-year-old man sat up in a truck cab at 2 in the morning, listened to that, said 3 words, lay back down, and never mentioned it again as long as I knew him. So, I took our truck and I drove at it, except there is nothing to drive at, is there? There is a 2-track that runs north, and there is a diesel with no side. So, I drove north on the 2-track, 11 miles by the odometer, doing maybe 25, perhaps a little less, because of the washboard, with my window down and my head half out of it. And it did not change. Not at a mile, not at 5, not at 11, which put me within a couple of miles of that posted boundary, and I turned around there because I was not going to be the man who drove into that in the dark. 11 miles back? Nothing. And my own engine at about 1900, which is not a quiet thing, and it never once covered it. It was under my engine the whole way, the way a low note sits under a high one. Then I got out at the camp and I got the lid. I stood between the corral and the rig, and I banged it, flat, hard, with the heel of my hand, at those buttes I had been banging at every night since June. And nothing came back, not late, not faint, nothing at all. I did it again, nothing. I did it a 3rd time, and I heard the crack of the lid go out over that flat and simply not return, and underneath it, unchanged, at the volume of a machine standing 10 feet from me, something idled. I stopped banging. I did not run. There was nothing to run from, and I want that said, because people always want that part, and there isn't one. Nothing came near me. Nothing looked at me. I did not see one single thing that whole night. I stood there in my boots and my undershirt with a piece of tin in my hand, and after a while, a minute or two, I put the lid on the ground and went back to the cot. and I lay on my back with my eyes open until it got light. It stopped sometime before 4. I could not tell you when, and I have never been able to. I know it was gone at 4 because I was awake at 4 and it was gone. The well came in at 310 feet the following week, 310 or 312, and we made a small ceremony of it the way you do. Bill Meeks said something over it. We pulled out of there in September. I kept the lid. That is the only thing anybody kept out of that night. It is dented, and it has been in a coffee can of worn bits on a shelf in my garage since about 1971, and I know exactly which dent is the one, and I have never told my wife which dent it is. I do not know why that is private. It is. I went back once, by daylight, in 1988, with a thermos and a folding chair, and I sat there most of an afternoon, 2 hours or so. There is a spring. There is a corral, more fallen down than it was. There is nothing. Present tense, since you asked what it left. I do not sleep where I can hear a road. Not a highway, not a lane, not a truck route 4 blocks over. My wife and I have moved twice about it, and she has been a good sport about that, and I have never explained it properly to her. Sound probably does funny things out there. Everybody who has ever worked that country will tell you so, and every one of them is right. But then again, 22 miles, and it never got one bit louder. 5 seconds to the mile. That is the whole of what I know about it, and I have taught it to children for 40 years, and children get it wrong because they hurry the syllables. 11 times that night I counted between the light and the sound, and 11 times I got one, and the mountain it came off is 11 miles from that kitchen window. I'm Rosalie Ancheta. I was 38. I taught elementary school on the proving ground. We lived in the housing at the village. My husband Reuben was a sergeant first class, and our daughter Cherie was 9, nearly 10. The kitchen was linoleum and a table with a plastic cloth on it, and a wall clock with a red second hand. There was a swamp cooler in the hall window that ran all summer and made the whole place smell faintly of wet straw, and there is a hose ritual that goes with those in August, which was Reuben's job and which he never did. So it was my job. The window over the sink faces west. There were 4 things on that sill, and I think I can still name them. A green glass bottle with nothing in it, a jar of clothes pegs, a little wooden bird Reuben's mother sent from Cavite that had lost a foot, and a spoon rest with a chip, which I never used as a spoon rest, and which held a ring while I did dishes. I could draw you that sill. 50 years, and I could draw it. Whatever else that night did, it printed 4 inches of a window ledge into me for good. And out that window, about 11 miles off, are the mountains on the west side of the valley. 11 miles. I know it because it is on a sign on the road out, and because Reuben said it out loud every single time we drove that way, the way men do. Now, the counting. You see the flash and you start counting, and when you hear it, you stop, and 5 seconds is a mile. That is because light gets to you at once, near enough, and sound does not. And the difference is the distance. I learned it in the 4th grade in Vallejo from a teacher whose exact words I can still say, "Don't hurry it, Rosalie. 1 Mississippi is 1 whole second, and you owe it the whole second." I taught 200 children that. It may be the best thing in the whole curriculum because they can do it. That night, at home, with no equipment and nobody's help, and it works. And a child who has watched arithmetic work on the actual sky is a different child afterward. And because I am the kind of person who checks herself, I used the clock. Red second hand, right there on the wall. I would count and then look, and after a while I did not need to look, and I still checked. I should say what teaching out there was like, because it is part of why I am the sort of person who counts. You get children for 4 months. They arrive in November, because their father's posted in November and they go in March because he is posted in March, and you make a class out of that and you do it again the next year. So you learn very fast what you can give a child in 4 months that they will keep. Long division, some of it. A poem, perhaps, if you are lucky. And the counting. The counting they keep because it is theirs, and it works anywhere in the world their father gets sent. And I have had letters from grown men about it from 3 continents. That is not a small thing to have done with a life, and I do not apologize for being certain about it. It was August, 2 in the morning. Reuben was out on a field problem until Thursday. Cherie was asleep in the next room with the fan she had to have on. The whole row was asleep, all the way down. And there was a telephone on that wall, and I did not have one person I could have called at 2 in the morning to say what I would have had to say. I was up for no reason I can give you. There is no reason in this story. I got a glass of water. The first flash came while I was at the sink, and the first thing I thought about was not the flash. It was that there was no cloud. I check the sky before I go to bed every night in August, because the cooler needs the dry to work, and everybody who has one learns that in their first summer. There was no cloud. There was no wind, none that I could feel. There was no smell of rain, and rain out there tells you it is coming a good half hour ahead by smell alone. So I counted the way I would have had a child do it. 1 Mississippi, and the sound came. 1. 1 is 1/5 of a mile. 1 is closer than the school, and the mountain was lit. That is what I want to be clear about, because I could have imagined a flash. I could not have imagined that I saw which mountain. I saw the shape of the top of it, and I saw the notch at the north end that we used to point Cherie at, and it was lit from somewhere for about half a second, maybe less, and it is 11 miles away. Then I was calm, and I was calm for 4 more of them, and I want to give that to you. The ranges, of course. They fire at night out there. It is a proving ground. That is the entire reason there is a village and a school and a swamp cooler in a hall window in the middle of a desert. You hear the ranges at night. I had slept through the ranges for 4 years, and so had everybody I knew. And a woman standing at a sink at 2 in the morning, being startled by the ranges, is a woman who has forgotten where she lives. So I stood there and watched 2 more and counted them out of habit, the way you keep tapping your foot after the music stops. After 4 years, you know a place by its night sounds. The buses that took the workers out went past at 5, and there was another at 5:30, and I stopped hearing them inside a month. The water truck. Somebody's screen door 2 doors down that had a spring in it. The ranges, which were a long way off and rolled. And in July and August, the coolers. All up and down that row. All of them running, so the whole street had a kind of breathing to it. I could have told you, that summer, with my eyes shut, what time it was and whether anything was out of place. Nothing was out of place. That is what I keep coming back to. The street was breathing and the clock was going and the fan was on in my daughter's room. Then I went and looked at the clock properly and did the arithmetic on the ranges, and that is the moment the floor went out. Because the ranges are further than that mountain, and a report from the ranges takes 1.5 minutes to get to that kitchen, and I had heard them do it, and it is a rolling, flat sound that arrives long after there is anything to see. 55 seconds, that is what 11 miles is. I want to say the number because the number is the story. 11 miles is 55 seconds of sound, and I was getting one. I decided I had hurried it. Of course I did. That is the correct thing to decide, and it is exactly what I tell children, and so I started over, out loud. In an empty kitchen at 2 in the morning, saying 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, into the room, slowly, owing each one the whole second, with my eyes on the sky over that mountain, and correcting my own syllables like a woman marking her own paper. 4 times I did that. 4 times I got 1. There were 11 altogether over about 19 minutes, as near as I could tell. Evenly spaced, more or less. And here's the thing about them. Not one was brighter than another. Not one was nearer. They did not come closer, they did not build, they did not do anything a storm does or a gun does. 11 of the same thing, and there was no tail on any of them. Thunder has a tail. Thunder rolls, because it comes off a long, crooked line in the sky, and different parts of it reach you at different times. Every one of these was one flat report, and then nothing, like a door in a hallway. On the 11th, the light and the sound were the same event. I had my fingertips on the glass of that window, which I had not decided to do, and the glass moved. Not much. About the way a pane moves when a heavy truck goes past a house. And the light was on that mountain at the same instant, and I know it was the same instant because I was looking at the second hand and I did not get to say the word. Cherie did not wake up. The Rao did not wake up. No dog in that whole row barked, and there were 4 dogs in it, and one of them barked at everything. And I did not go and wake my daughter. People ask about that, and I have one answer, and it has never changed. There was nothing to show her. Whatever it was over in half a second, and I could not have said look at that, because there was nothing there to look at. It was a woman standing in a kitchen saying, I heard something. So I let her sleep, and I sat down at the table with the glass of water, and at about 3:30, or a bit later, I went to bed and I slept. That is not a brave story. I know it isn't. I have thought 100 times, probably 1,000, that a different woman would have gone out onto that step and stood there and watched it out to the end, and I did not, and I have made my peace with that. Reuben came back Thursday. He sat in that kitchen with his boots off and he listened to the whole thing all the way through without interrupting once, which I think was not like him. And at the end of it he said, huh. And then he asked what was for supper, and it never came up again. 26 years of marriage and it never came up again, and I do not say that bitterly, and I want to say it twice. I do not say that bitterly. He was a good man, and I think he was tired, and he did not have anywhere to put it. Neither did I. That is probably the honest truth about most of what happens to people. That Saturday I made a picnic and we drove out that way. I want to be honest about my reason, which was not investigation. It was that I wanted to stand at the bottom of that mountain and look back at my own house, and I did. Cherie ate 2 sandwiches and found a rock she kept for years. I think she has it still. Lorraine Tenney from next door came with us and talked the whole way there, and the whole way back, which I was grateful for. And from out there the village is nothing. A gray line with some trees in it. 11 miles off across that flat. And you cannot pick out a roof, let alone a kitchen window. I stood there with my hand up against the sun looking at a smudge, and I thought, that is how far away I was. Then we ate our sandwiches and came home. That is the entire investigation I ever conducted. I kept nothing because there was nothing to keep, except that on the back of a lesson plan for the first week of school, in pen, in my own writing, I wrote, 11, 1 each. That is all it says. I found it in a box in 1994 when we were moving my mother, and I read it standing up in a garage, and I put it back in the box, and it is still in the box. Present tense. I still count. I taught it to my grandchildren, and I correct their syllables, and they think I am very strict about it, and I am. I have never told a class about that night. 40 years, and hundreds of children, and I have taught them the rule, and I have never once told them the night the rule did not work, and I am not going to start. Sound is 5 seconds to the mile. That is the whole of what I know, and I have taught it for 40 years, and I believe it. But then again, I counted 11 times, and I got 1 every time. 22 years, 1 blank. That is my whole record, and you are welcome to it. The mountain that is 44 miles from my gate was not there, and the mountains that are 70 miles away, behind it, were standing there sharp with snow on them. I'm Afton Bagley. I was 63 then. I kept the weather on our place in the valley, on the road that runs along the east side of the proving ground, and I had been doing it every evening at 7 for 22 years. It is a volunteer thing. You are not paid. There are hundreds of us, I believe, and there always have been all over the country, farm wives and school teachers and postmasters, and once a month you put a form in an envelope, and it goes off to Salt Lake, and after that I could not tell you what becomes of it, not really. They send you the envelopes, already printed, and there's a small pleasure in that which I have never got over. You put a month of your evenings in it, and you seal it, and it goes, and somewhere a person you will never meet adds your valley to everybody else's, and out of that comes the number they say on the radio. I liked being a part of something that large and that dull. There is a little white box on a cedar post in the yard, louvered sides so the air goes through it, and a door on a brass hook. Inside there is a thermometer that catches the highest it has been and the lowest it has been since you last looked, and you read both. And then you reset the index with a magnet, which is a satisfying thing to do, I have always thought, and I have never got tired of it. There is a rain gauge in a ring on another post, and there is a clipboard on a nail inside the porch with the month's form on it, and a pencil on a string, and I sharpen that pencil with a knife. 7 in the evening. Every evening. I did it the evening my husband died, in October of '86, at 7, before I telephoned anybody, and I've never once been able to explain that to a person's satisfaction, including my own. Kern had been gone 4 years by then. Hart, in the truck, in the yard, they told me it was quick, which he would have picked if anybody had asked him. There were 2 jobs of his I kept doing badly on purpose. I never learned to sharpen a knife the way he did, and I never fixed a latch on the west gate. Tol Machem came Tuesdays and did the things I could not do, and he never latched that gate either, and we had the same argument about it for 9 years, and neither of us ever meant a word of it. The buses went past the gate at 5 and at 5:30, out and back, taking the workers to the post and bringing them home. When we first came, I used to look up. By about 1965, I had stopped hearing them entirely, and I would not have been able to tell you they had gone by. There is a thing about living next to a place like that. You do not think about it. It is the same as living next to a mountain. Somebody asks you about it at a wedding and you find you have nothing at all to say. On the form, there is a line for visibility. You are supposed to estimate it, and to estimate it, you use things you know the distance of. Mine were 4. The corral, which is about 1/4 of a mile. The cottonwoods at Iosepa, which are 4. The point of the mountains on the west side, which is 9. And away off south, the far range across the flat, which is 44 miles, and which I looked at every single evening for 22 years, the way you look at a clock on a mantle. Corral, cottonwoods, the point, the far range. I said those 4 to myself in that order about 8,000 times, give or take, and I stopped hearing myself do it, the way you stop hearing a grace you have said since you were a child. This was November, the 9th or the 10th, and it was 34 degrees and there was no wind at all, and the air was, I think, the clearest air I have ever stood in. I noticed that as a pleasure first. I want that understood. I went out the porch door with the clipboard and I stopped because it was beautiful, and there's not one thing in this story that begins with fear. In 22 years, I never once wrote unlimited in that box. There is always something out there. Dust off the flat, or smoke from somewhere, or the haze that comes in summer, or the mountains going soft in their own blue. Always something. And that evening there was nothing at all, and every edge in that valley was, I would say, cut out of paper. So I did the corral and the cottonwoods and the point of the mountains at 9 miles. And then I looked south for the far range, and it was not there, not hazy, not softened, not lost in the light, and the light was still good. There were a good 10 minutes of it left, perhaps more. It was not there, and where it belongs there was sky, ordinary evening sky, all the way down to the flat. And behind where it belongs, standing up sharp with snow on them, were the high mountains on the state line. I have seen those twice in 22 years, and both times in January, on the coldest, cleanest days. And both times I went in and told Kern about it. They are 70 miles off, or somewhere close to it. They are a very long way further away than the thing that was missing. I stood there a while, and then I went in and got Kern's binoculars off the nail by the door and came back out. Both of it was still true through the glass. The sky where a mountain goes, and past it, snow. I put the binoculars on the porch rail. I stood there with the clipboard in the crook of my arm, and I did not feel what I expect you think I felt. I was not afraid, then or since, and I do not think that is bravery. I think it is just how I am made. I was 63 years old and alone on a ranch in a valley I had lived in for 31 years, and something out there was not adding up. And I remember thinking quite calmly, well now. I wrote the maximum, 51. I wrote the minimum, 29. I wrote the rain, which was nothing, and you write a naught and a dash through it. And then I looked at the box for visibility and at the sky where a mountain goes, and I put the pencil back on its string. I took the clipboard in and I hung it on its nail, and I had my supper and I washed the one plate. 1 plate and 1 cup, which after 4 years is simply what the sink looks like. And I did not turn the radio on. I am not making anything of that. I did not turn it on most evenings. The mountain was there the next evening. 44 miles, a little hazy, the way it usually is at that time of year. It has been there every evening since, and I looked at it every evening for another 9 years until I gave the station up, and it never did anything else, not once that I noticed. There is a box in the closet in the back bedroom with 22 years of those forms in it. Every one of them is filled in all the way across, every day of every month, in pencil, in my hand, and there is 1 blank in all of it. 1 box, in November of 1990, with nothing written in it, in a column that is otherwise complete for 8,000 and some evenings. Mr. Ibsen, from Salt Lake, noticed it. He telephoned in the spring about something else, and mentioned it in a friendly way, the way you would mention a missing stitch, and asked whether I remembered what happened that evening. And I said I couldn't say, which was true. That is what I want people to understand about that answer. It was not a lie, and it was not a secret. I could not say. There was no number that was true, and I was not going to put a number in that box that was not true, and there is no box on that form for what it was. He said that was all right, or words to that effect. And we talked about something else, and he was a nice man, and he retired the year after, I believe. I still write the form at 7. Different place now, and a smaller one, a good deal smaller, and it is not a real station anymore, it is a notebook. But I go out at 7, and I read a thermometer on a fence, and I write it down. The box is still in the closet. I do not take it out. It is a cardboard box with a lid and 22 years in it, and I know which envelope, and I know which page, and I have not looked at it since about 1996. I still see that evening when I am not thinking about anything. Not the mountain, the other things. The little white box on the post with its door standing open on the brass hook. The pencil hanging on its string, turning. The light going off the flat, which takes about 4 minutes out there, more or less, and then is gone all at once. And the paper on the clipboard, going gray, with 3 numbers on it and 1 space. Maybe I looked at the wrong piece of sky. that is probably it. I was 63, and I had been doing it a long time, and a thing you have done 8,000 times is a thing you can do wrong once. But then again, I went in for the glasses, and I came back out, and it was still gone.